huge horror movie fan. I'm also a fan of girly pop movies, so of course one of my favorite movies is The Craft from 1996, and I thought it'd be fun to do a deep dive on each of the characters. We're going to start off with Rochelle. Rochelle was portrayed by Rachel True, and she was notably the only person of color in this entire film. And her character actually was written to be a white girl. When they met Rachel, they decided to pivot and rewrite her story. When we're first introduced to Rochelle, Bonnie, and Nancy, we see them walking down the hallway, and the dynamics are very apparent. Obviously, Bonnie's extremely shy and timid. Nancy is very much hated by everyone, and Rochelle is just walking alongside of them, kind of visibly irritated about how everyone's reacting to the three of them. Based on a deleted scene, it's confirmed that she's like the only black person in that entire school. People are treating her differently, ostracizing her, and then she has a terrible bully in Laura Lizzie, who is constantly making derogatory racial comments towards her. I think it's extremely telling at the beginning of the movie when Sarah is talking to Chris, and Chris is talking about the bitches of Eastwick, and he's calling out each of the girls. He talks about Bonnie and her scars, he talks about Nancy, but then he doesn't even mention Rochelle, even though she's sitting with them. He doesn't even register in his mind, so that kind of teaches us how she's being viewed at this school. She's just kind of being overlooked completely. And Rochelle's character seems to really just want to fit in. Like, she's involved in her swim team. She's the only girl who has like an extracurricular activity, so it kind of seems like she just really wants to be accepted, but people are not welcoming to her in this school. So she has found comfort in Nancy and Bonnie. When the three girls finally understand that Sarah is their fourth, they are very excited because they have no power individually. We see that Rochelle is dealing with a lot of pain. And when all the girls kind of go on their little field trip and they're sitting together and they're expressing what they want and their desires, Rochelle does say, "Give me the ability to not hate those that hate me." So we can tell that Rochelle's a genuinely nice person that doesn't necessarily wish terrible harm on those that hate her. But later on we do see, once the girls start to kind of understand the power that they have with Sarah, she does enlist Sarah's help to put a spell on Laura. But even when they're doing the spell, Rochelle asks Sarah, like, "I wonder what it's going to look like. I wonder what's going to happen to her." And then soon enough, Laura Lizzie's hair starts falling out. And Rochelle looks like she has some remorse. A couple comments that she says, like, "Hey, she has to wear a hat now. Isn't that fun?" But later on, we see Rochelle reacting to seeing Laura, like, sitting on the bathroom floor, crying about her hair. Because Rochelle does have empathy. And even though what she did to Laura is not necessarily undeserved, I think she does feel remorse from the decision. I do think Rochelle is, like, one of the only girls in this movie that actually did kind of care for Sarah, because if you look at the group as a whole, it does seem like the entire group really wanted to use Sarah because they understood the power that she had, the power she gave them. But there are many moments between Rochelle and Sarah where they actually kind of connected, because like when Sarah is attacked by Chris, she approaches Rochelle's house, and Sarah's the one that helps Rochelle with the spell in the first place. So clearly I think they are actual friends, but later on in the movie, Rochelle just kind of goes along with whatever Nancy wants to do, which is incredibly unkind. Honestly, rewatching this movie for like the millionth time, it always gets me upset, because near the end of the movie, when they're going to that house party, Laura Lizzie does approach Rochelle, and she approaches her like she's going to apologize for what she's done, but the scene cuts off. Like, we don't get the rest of that scene. And I don't understand why we didn't get the rest of that moment, because I feel like that was a pivotal moment for her character. But as the movie goes on and what happens to Chris happens, Sarah obviously really wants out of the coven. Like, she is really freaked out. She wants to get out. And Nancy now has all this power, this huge ego, and she wants to punish Sarah. And because what I think one of the core desires that Rochelle has is to fit in, she goes along with what Nancy wants to do. And we see that kind of throughout the entire movie. She kind of relies on Nancy, even though I think she feels confident enough to speak her mind and her opinions. Inevitably, she kind of falls to Nancy and what she decides to do. So we see when Nancy wants to punish Sarah, Rochelle is there haunting her dreams. She even tells her to leave the planet. We see this kind of cruelty coming from Rochelle and Bonnie and Nancy. At the end of the movie, they do so many terrible things to Sarah. They do a glamour to make her think that her parents have passed away in a plane accident, and they encourage her to go upstairs and end her life. But when Sarah kind of invokes the spirit as well and does a 180 on them, Rochelle looks in the mirror and she sees her hair gone. So it's that moment where the power of they really like strikes Rochelle, and she gets like a hard look in the mirror. It does make me kind of sad at the end of the film when Rochelle and Bonnie show up at the end and they're like approaching Sarah like, "Hey bud, that was just a joke, don't worry about it." And they're not very apologetic at all. And it becomes clear that they've only approached Sarah because they no longer have powers, and they kind of wanted her help to continue doing things. And Sarah's like, "Yeah, don't let the door hit you on the way out," kind of thing. And I think it speaks to how power can really change a person. I think Rochelle is a good person, but she kind of let the power go to her head, and she kind of let Nancy dictate her action, and she had such a lack of empathy by the end of the film. But I do think Rochelle's character is really interesting. I do think think her story is very important, even though I don't think they fleshed it out as well as they should have. I really like Rochelle's character. I'm looking forward to talking about the rest of the girls in the craft. We're continuing our craft character deep dive, and we're diving into Bonnie. Bonnie is portrayed by Neve Campbell, and the moment we see her walking down that hallway at the beginning of the movie, we immediately pick up on the fact that she's very unconfident, she's very insecure, she's walking through the hall completely covered in all these bags of clothing, she has her hair in her face, she has her face in a book, she's trying not to make eye contact with any of the other students. You can tell she basically doesn't want anyone to notice her. We later find out that she was in a house fire when she was a child, and she's very badly burned. She's covered in a lot of scars. Bonnie's greatest desire is to be beautiful. At the beginning of the movie, though, we can pick up that Bonnie is the most perceptive person in the group. She's reading the almanac at the beginning. She says something new is coming. And when she sees Sarah in class playing with that pencil, she immediately picks up that Sarah is their fourth. The three other girls know that they have no power individually. They need a fourth. They need to complete their coven in order to gain any sort of power. And Sarah is a natural witch, and Bonnie immediately picks up on the power that she possesses. She immediately goes to the other girls and lets them know she's here. Initially, the girls aren't very friendly to Sarah in the lab, but they later approach her and invite her to go shopping. One thing we learn about Bonnie very early on, when they're walking towards the shop, someone makes a comment about Sarah's scars. And we learn that Sarah tried to unalive herself previously, but Bonnie immediately is like, hey, you even did it the right way. Look at your wrist. So we can assume that Bonnie is also incredibly depressed and that she also might have attempted to unalive herself at some point. So we can see Bonnie is in a lot of pain, both emotionally and physically. We see Bonnie go to these experimental treatments to try to remove the scars, and the treatment looks incredibly painful. We see when the girls go to the field and they're sharing their innermost desires. Bonnie says she wants to be beautiful outside as well as in. And later on we see that with Sarah's help, the rituals work. Bonnie's scars basically wipe off clean at her next appointment, and she is cured. There's a theory when Bonnie said, "Take my scars," not only did her scars on the outside get wiped away, any of her emotional scars that made her kind of who she was, the empathetic person that we were introduced to, were also kind of wiped clean. So she became a very narcissistic, self-involved person. And I want to believe this theory because otherwise it just kind of proves that Bonnie was never really a nice person. She was always kind of a mean girl that was stunted by her outward appearance. So I really want to believe that she was a nicer person at the beginning of this film. But once her scars are wiped clean, we see her strut through the halls at school. She's a whole new person. She's super confident. She's flirting with everyone, and she has no inhibitions anymore. On the one hand, it's really good for her. Like, she's found her lust for life, but now she kind of comes across as a shallow husk of the person she once was. And as the movie goes on, she just seems to be more callous and unfeeling towards anything that's going on. We see when the girls decide to turn on Sarah, she mocks Sarah. She's like, "How have you been sleeping recently?" And she joins in with Nancy and Rochelle, kind of encouraging her to end her own life. She seems to take pleasure in all the abuse that they are now throwing at Sarah, because they've basically taken what they wanted from Sarah. They all three have power now, and they've gotten exactly what they wanted. Bonnie finally got what she wanted. She is now beautiful on the outside. All three of the girls seem completely devoid of any humanity. They honestly seem pretty evil. And later on, when the rule of three hits Bonnie and she looks in the mirror and she sees that more of her body is badly scarred, it's like her worst nightmare is staring at her back in the mirror. At the end of the movie, we see Bonnie and Rochelle approach Sarah's house, and they're basically trying to get information from her. They're like, "Hey, did you also lose all your powers? Because we don't have any powers anymore." They invite her to hang out again, but clearly all they want is Sarah's power. I think Bonnie's a cautionary tale about what can happen when you get everything that you want. Beauty is only skin deep, apparently, so we learn that Bonnie really isn't that nice of a person. She seemed like a nicer person when she had her scars and insecurity. And I want to believe that maybe because of the magic that they used, maybe her inner scars were wiped away. Anything that made her empathetic and a loving person was kind of removed from her. But the reality might be that she was always not a very nice person. And it just took her becoming attractive to kind of reveal that. But I love Neve Campbell, and I love all the characters in the craft. Bonnie is an interesting one. We're continuing our craft character deep dive, and we're diving into Nancy. When we first see Nancy at school, people are literally like startled and like trying to get away from her. It's clear that people at the school are afraid of her and are judging her. They clearly think of her as this like big scary witch. This probably deep down hurts Nancy's feelings, but she'll never let anyone know that. We see her as people are mean to her. She literally stares people down to make them uncomfortable because she likes confrontation. In the same scene, we see Chris and his terrible friends mocking her and making fun of her, and she literally stares them down and smirks at them. Later on, we learn the backstory between Nancy and Chris. We learn that Chris also seduced Nancy. They slept together, and then he went around spreading terrible rumors about her at school. And so that was clearly very hurtful because she explains to Sarah, "Hey, Stay away from him, he spreads disease, I know from experience. One of the central themes of Nancy's character is her need for power and her jealousy over Sarah. Later on, we see Nancy's terrible home life. She lives in a rundown trailer with her mother and her abusive stepfather. We see her go home one day in the rain. She lies on her bed, there's water dripping from the ceiling, and she hears people screaming. So she clearly feels very powerless in her own life. And so when all the girls are in the field and they're sharing their greatest desires, Nancy says that she wants all the power of Minot. She describes into Minot, she says, if God and the devil were like football players, Minot is the stadium that they would battle on. We learn that Sarah is a natural witch. She has power all on her own, and the other girls really need her to be their fourth in order to gain any power themselves. And Nancy is very jealous of Sarah. When Sarah's explaining the powers that she has and that sometimes she wishes things to happen and they just happen, like one day she wanted it to rain and a pipe burst in her room, and then Nancy's like, yeah, whatever, trying to diminish Sarah's abilities, but clearly she's very jealous that Sarah has this natural ability that she does not possess. She's also just very jealous about Sarah's presence in the group because the girls start thanking Sarah when their wishes start coming true. Nancy just storms away because she's upset. What she wanted hasn't happened yet, and all the other girls are attributing all the success to Sarah. But later on, we see her go home to her trailer. She's performing a spell. Her stepfather starts hurting her mother, and she screams. And then he starts having a heart attack, and he passes away. Then good things start to happen. Her and her mother get money. They're starting to look up. But the thing about Nancy is just having a little bit of power is not enough. She wants it all. So we see them go to Lirio's occult shop, and she wants to buy the book to invoke the spirit. And the occult shop owner warns her, like, hey, you're inexperienced. This is too dangerous for you. And she's like, I don't care. So she buys the book, and the girls go to the beach to invoke the spirit. It's a pretty intense scene. We see in the morning, the girls wake up and they look on the water, and Nancy's literally walking on water. She has all the power of Minot. We see that she's pretty mentally unstable after the fact. We see a bunch of shark on the beach, and she's so giddy. She's like, these are my gifts. He gave me all these gifts. And Sarah's starting to understand, like, Nancy's dangerous, and she's also completely unhinged. But when Sarah is urging the girls to understand, like, hey, I think what we did was wrong. The power of three, what we've done unto others is going to come back to us threefold. We need to be careful. Nancy's like, quit trying to win the other girls over. Are you still in this group or do you want out? And Sarah's like, no, I want to stay in the group. But she just wants to warn them because they're not respecting the balance. Later on, after Sarah is attacked by Chris, she goes to the girls, and Nancy's like, I'm going to go play a little game. I'm going to go confront him. So she goes to the house party to confront Chris. Says she wants to teach him a lesson, but we see her in the bedroom, and she's trying to kind of seduce Chris, and he wants nothing to do with her. He pushes her off the bed, and that clearly hurts her feelings. She does a glamour to turn herself into Sarah, and then they start doing it on the bed. When Sarah finally shows up, she comes in the room. And obviously Chris is very thrown off by this, and he's pretty mean to Nancy. And Nancy said she wanted to teach him a lesson, but deep down I think she really wanted to seduce him. I think that little fling that they had and that rejection he gave her really messed her up, and I think that's another level of jealousy she had over Sarah, was that now she doesn't like to see Chris pine over Sarah. And I think she wanted to take Chris away from Sarah in a way. She ends up using her power to push him out of the window, and he passes away. Nancy has zero remorse about this at all, because obviously Chris wasn't exactly a nice person. He did hurt her, but she didn't have to do what she did. And when Sarah's understandably freaked out, she tries to do a binding spell on Nancy, but it doesn't work. Nancy knows what's going on, and they start hunting Sarah's dreams. And all the girls approach her in the bathroom. They make it very clear that something bad's gonna happen to Sarah, and they threaten her. Nancy says, you know what happens in the olden days when a girl would leave a coven? They would unalive her. So Sarah's extremely freaked out. She goes to seek help from the occult shop owner. Sarah's telling her, like, Nancy can see in my mind. She knows what I'm thinking. She knows what's going on. Like, she has complete power. And Lirio tells her to invoke the spirit as well, and that Nancy is using things for the wrong reasons, but that Sarah can respect the balance, something Nancy's not able to do. But later on, we see all the girls go to Sarah's house. They're doing all these tricks on her. Sarah unfortunately disclosed to them that before she tried to unalive herself, she was hallucinating snakes and bugs and stuff, so Nancy makes sure she sees all these snakes, all these bugs, all this stuff everywhere to try to freak her out. Basically write a note for her and tell her to go upstairs and unalive herself. Nancy uses a blade. So things are getting real. Like, they clearly want Sarah to no longer be living. But Sarah invokes the spirit, and she gets power, and she freaks Bonnie and Rochelle out enough to where they leave. So it's just her and Nancy. Nancy goes upstairs and realizes that Sarah's still with us, and now she has so much more power. And Nancy at first is like, sorry, this was, not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Sorry I did what I did. I'm gonna go. But Sarah's like, no, I bind you, Nancy. She starts doing the binding spell, and Nancy freaks out. There's this huge fight between Nancy and Sarah ultimately prevails, binding Nancy's power. And in doing so, Nancy goes insane, and later in the movie we see that she is confined to a bed in an asylum. Although we can feel bad for Nancy, seeing how terrible her home life was, seeing how she was treated by everyone else, Nancy still made the choice to harm other people in her search for power, and she was overcome with her jealousy against Sarah. She clearly did not respect the balance. She was trying to gain all the power for selfish reasons, and Minot did not look kindly on that. And I do feel bad for Nancy, but looking at everything that she's done and how absolutely evil and cruel she was to Sarah at the end, that's pretty unforgivable. So she is definitely the villain of the story, but she's a villain that understandably has been hurt. And because she's been hurt, that kind of fueled her decisions later on. We're continuing our craft character deep dive, and we're diving into Sarah. When we're first introduced to Sarah, she is moving to LA with her father and stepmother, and the first thing she does in the new house is display a picture of her late mother. And later on, we learn that her mother passed away during childbirth, and it seems that Sarah kind of blames herself for this. Later on, we learn that Sarah has dealt with a lot of mental health struggles. She's very depressed, and she attempted to unalive herself at some point. When she enters the school, she enters kind of timidly, but she immediately catches the eye of Chris, who later approaches her and is flirting with her. You see her attempt to talk to Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy earlier in the lab, but they are very unfriendly to her. So later on, when Chris is talking to her at lunch, he warns her about the bitches of Eastwick, and he tells her, yeah, they're witches, stay away from them. He also invites Sarah to watch him play football later, and at first she's like, yeah, that sounds so boring. Then she goes and like creepily looks at him while he plays football, and the other girls approach her, and Nancy warns her like, hey, Chris is no good. Chris is bad news, but Sarah doesn't exactly heed her warning. Later on, they visit the occult shop, and as they're walking through, we can tell Sarah's very interested in what's at the shop, but she doesn't really have any prior knowledge. She speaks to the shop owner, Lyria, and she tells her, like, I don't really know anything about this. And Lyria tells her, you might be a natural witch. Here's a book on it. But we already know that she's a natural witch because we saw her earlier in the day playing with this pencil. She makes it stand on end, and Bonnie's immediately like, oh, this person's our foe. Girls are leaving the occult shop. This strange man with the snake approaches Sarah again, and Sarah's running away from him. She's really freaked out, and then all of a sudden, all the girls turn to look at him, and they all think together that they wish he would be run over. He does get run over, and he passes away. And all the girls run into the woods, and they're kind of talking about, hey, did you think that? I thought it too. The girls are like, north, south, east, west. You are our fourth. You complete the coven. And Sarah's kind of thrown off by this. She decides to go and meet up with Chris. Chris kisses her, and he invites her over to his house, and Sarah's like, I don't think so. We pick up on her insecurity because she asks Chris, oh, are you mad? And Chris is like, no, I'm not mad. But then later the next day when she goes to school, the other girls let her know that he spread a terrible rumor about her, that they slept together, that she was the worst lay he ever had. And she approaches him and confronts him, and he's so degrading. He mocks her and he leaves. And Sarah is really, really hurt by this. But Sarah finds comfort in her new friends, and she dives in deeper to her natural ability as a witch. Earlier in the movie, Sarah's kind of describing her abilities to the other girls. She says sometimes she just wishes things to happen, and they do, but not in the ways that you would expect. Like one day she was wishing it would rain, but then a pipe burst and flooded the room. So we understand she has a lot of power, and she can also kind of move things with her mind because of the telekinesis with the pencil. So at this point, Sarah doesn't even fully understand the power that she possesses, but we do see Nancy is pretty jealous. Later on, we see all the girls go into the field, and they're doing this ritual, and they're kind of expressing their greatest desires. And Sarah says she wants to love herself more and allow herself to be loved by others, and then she mentions Chris. Later on in the movie, we see the girls' kind of wishes starting to come true. And this love spell starts working on Chris. We see one day Chris just turns around and is totally fixated on Sarah. Sarah and Bonnie are having a fun time with Chris as they walk down to Mass, and they make him hold all their books and her purse, and like the rest of his friends are making fun of him, but he just seems to be in this weird trance where the only thing he can focus on is Sarah. And thanks to Sarah's abilities, the other girls start getting what they wanted. Unfortunately for Nancy though, she's the last one to get anything that she wants, and her jealousy against Sarah is kind of overcoming her. As the girls continue to hang out, we see more and more examples of how powerful Sarah is. We see all the girls hanging out, and Sarah shows that she can do a glamour. She can change her appearance very easily. Initially, when she changes her eye color, the girls act like they're not that impressed, and then she changes her hair, and people are like, wow, okay. But throughout the movie, it does seem like as she's doing certain things, the other girls are pretending like they're not that impressed, even though it's very impressive what she's able to do, because she has a natural ability to do these things. Things with Chris continues to escalate throughout the movie. He shows up outside of her bedroom window, saying he can't eat, he can't sleep, he doesn't know what's wrong with him, all he wants is her. Sarah's starting to feel really guilty about this love spell she's put on Chris. Later on, the girls go back to the occult shop, and they talk to Lyria. And while Nancy's trying to buy a book to invoke the spirit, Lyria warns her, you are not experienced enough for this, this is dangerous. And she also warns the girls, whatever you put out comes back threefold, so treat others as you would want to be treated. The girls go to the beach and help Nancy invoke the spirit, and Sarah's really freaked out because Nancy now can walk on water. Nancy has all this power now that she didn't possess before. Sarah is understanding how dangerous and unhinged Nancy is, and she's warning the other girls, hey, we should really listen to Lyria, because I don't have a good feeling about what we've done, what we put out into the world, it's gonna come back on us threefold. Like, we need to be better, we need to be more careful. And all the other girls are like, yeah, right, if you went out of the coven, you should say so. But later on, we see her talking to Chris, and he convinces her to go to dinner with him, and he takes her to a parking lot. First, they're just talking, and Sarah's kind of disclosing some of the emotions she's dealing with, and Chris is like pretending to listen, but clearly he just wants one thing. Then on he tries to SA her, and she's able to get away from him, and she goes to the other girls to express, hey, I don't know what's going on. It's like he wasn't even there. It's really scary. I don't like what's going on. And Nancy goes to go teach him a lesson. But Sarah knows that Nancy cannot be trusted, so the girls go to the house party, and they find Nancy has used a glamour on Chris. She has seduced him, and once Chris realizes that it's Nancy and not Sarah, he starts kind of freaking out, and he insults Nancy, and of course Nancy does not take kindly to that and uses her power to push him out the window. And so Sarah is devastated because she feels responsible for Chris's death, and she's just flat out terrified of Nancy. She tries to do a binding spell against Nancy, but because of the powers that Nancy possesses, she knows what Sarah is doing. So Nancy, Rochelle, and Bonnie all haunt her dreams, and they try to freak her out, and they approach Sarah in the bathroom, basically threaten her that she should not only leave town, she should leave the planet. And Nancy threatens Sarah by asking, you know what happens when a witch would leave her coven in the olden days? She would be unalived. And so Sarah knows that she's in deep trouble. She runs to Lirio's occult shop. She basically begs with her, I'm in so much danger. Nancy knows what I'm thinking. She knows what I'm doing. I don't know what to do. She has all this power now. Lirio brings her to the temple in the back of the occult shop, and she tells Sarah that she sees a tremendous light in her, more so than she's ever seen before. And she lets Sarah know that her mother was also a witch, and she also had the ability. She tells Sarah that she can defeat those that challenge her, but she has to surrender herself to the spirit and invoke the spirit. She says, listen to the voice of your mother. She wants you to be strong. And they try to do a binding spell on Nancy, but then Nancy sends some power throughout the shop, and it freaks Sarah out, and she runs. Early in the movie, Sarah disclosed to the other girls that before she tried to unalive herself, she was hallucinating and seeing all these bugs and snakes and stuff. So when she gets home, the house is empty, and she gets a phone call from Nancy who's telling her, you should check the TV. And she looks on the TV, and they are doing a glamour on her to make her think that her father and her stepmother went back to LA to try to find her, and that there was a plane crash and that they perished. And Sarah tries to run outside of the house, but there are bugs and snakes everywhere. She runs back into the house, into the bath. Then Nancy shows up, and Nancy starts mocking her, and all the girls are basically encouraging her to unalive herself. They've even written a note for her. Nancy approaches her and opens up her scars. Sarah goes upstairs, and she's just beside herself. She doesn't know what to do, and she looks at the picture of her mother, and it starts to move. Her mother starts to speak to her, and Sarah's able to invoke the spirit. We see that her scars have closed, and so she basically invokes the power of three against Rochelle and Bonnie, and they see themselves in the mirror, and they freak out and leave. Nancy goes upstairs and is not pleased to find out that Sarah is better than ever, and she has more power than ever. Sarah lets her know that Manoa is not happy with Nancy about how she's not respecting the balance and using things for her own selfish gain. She does a glamour on her to make her look like she has snakes for fingers, and Nancy attempts to apologize, and she's like, hey, sorry about it. I'm gonna go. And then Sarah's like, nope. And so she starts doing the binding spell on Nancy, and Nancy freaks out and tries to attack her, and there's this scuffle, but Sarah prevails. Sarah's magic is stronger than Nancy's, and she's able to bind her, which leads Nancy to go insane, and we see her at the end of the movie in an insane asylum. But Sarah's more confident than ever. She's the only one that has the natural ability, and when Bonnie and Rochelle approach her later in the movie trying to like, hey, you want to be friends again? Sarah's like, no, I don't think so. She proves her power when they doubt her. And so we've seen Sarah grow into the woman that she's meant to become. With the newfound confidence that she's gotten from her late mother, from Lirio, she went from a very insecure girl at the beginning of the film to a very secure, confident woman who has these great abilities that can respect the balance. I really love this movie, and I really love Sarah. She's such a great character, and I thought Robin Tunney portrayed her so well. I just love all these characters, but especially Sarah.